Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So, I figured I would make a quick video here and give my final thoughts and my prediction for the fight that's taking place this weekend, the light heavyweight undisputed fight between Bivol and Beterbiev. Don't really need to give this fight much of an introduction. Everybody's hyped about it, everybody's excited. It's a fight that I've wanted to see for about 5 years, maybe even longer. And thoroughly looking forward to it. Probably the best fight of the year aside from Fury and Usyk, who are of course set to fight again in December, I believe. So yeah, really good fight. Don't need to blow V8 too much about it. We all know that. So what I wanted to start with this video, now this is going to be a bit of a weird one. It's going to be a bit more meta than my usual fight prediction. So, boxing lately, as I'm sure many of my viewers know, hasn't really made a lot of sense. Now, what do I mean by this? Let me try and think of the best way to articulate it. So, to give you a couple of fairly recent examples of fights that have been a little bit unusual in terms of how they were viewed going in and what ended up happening during the fight and how people behaved afterwards. It just doesn't make sense. Boxing is a sport that sometimes transcends logic, and certain things tend to happen that just don't make a lot of sense. So, earlier this year, Joe Joyce fought Derek Chisora. Now, going into that fight, I didn't even bother making a prediction video, as you guys know, because I honestly thought it was pretty much a foregone conclusion. I looked at that fight, and logically, I would assume that the guy who has every single advantage physically would win the fight and win the fight well. So you had two guys there who were relatively similar in terms of their approach, right? I'm talking about Joyce and Chisora. Both guys are very tough, durable guys, you know, known for being tough guys, known for being pressure fighters, known for coming forward aggressively, throwing a high volume of punches, relying on their chin, relying on their stamina. That's not to say that they don't have skills or boxing ability, but that's not what they're known for, essentially. They're known for being pressure fighters, and they're known for being very tough. However, Joe Joyce was significantly bigger. Joe Joyce was significantly stronger. Joe Joyce was significantly tougher. Joe Joyce was significantly fresher, right, had taken less damage over the course of his career. Chisora is a guy who had looked pretty shot in his recent fights. And to top it off, I mean, against the same level of opposition, Joe Joyce was able to completely outperform Chisora. Okay, one opponent that they both fought was, of course, Joseph Parker, and he was able to comprehensively beat Chisora in their second fight. You know, dropped him multiple times and won very clearly, pretty much schooled him, and won the first fight in a close and cagey outing where opinions were split on who won, but nonetheless, he was able to win it legitimately, in my opinion. So, you take that into consideration, and I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I promise you there's a point to this. So, Parker completely dominates Chisora in the second fight. He fights Joe Joyce, and he gets absolutely battered and beaten, and conclusively dominated and stopped, right? Brutally knocked out. You know, he gets broken down, schooled, dominated, outworked, outlanded, beaten up, and brutally knocked out, essentially, right? So that kind of put the final nail in the coffin for how pretty much everybody saw Chisora's fight with Joyce. Logically, you would assume that Joyce would win that fight easily, right? All he has to do is do what he normally does, and he wins the fight, right? So the fight happens, and Joe Joyce decides to square up, and I talked about this in a video. He decides to square up, put his feet parallel, essentially, stand right in front of Chisora, and have his hands right by his waist, and basically just let Chisora wail on him all night, occasionally throw in a little slap. Doesn't throw any jabs, doesn't throw any straight punches, doesn't throw any counter punches, doesn't move his head, doesn't use distance control, doesn't try to get superior foot position, doesn't do any of the things that he normally tries to do. He just stands in front of Chisora, throwing little unguided punches, essentially just slaps, you know, with nothing on them. and takes a bit of a beating and loses the fight. Now, nobody expected that to happen. Nobody predicted it would happen. The way that you would logically assume that that fight would go, it didn't go that way. So we had another even more recent example, Anthony Joshua fighting Daniel Dubois. Again, a very similar situation where you have two guys who are very similar, right? They bring a lot of the similar attributes to the table. They have a similar fighting style, both known for similar things. It's just that one guy was a little bit better in every area, as far as we knew. Both were big guys. Anthony Joshua was slightly bigger, slightly taller, slightly stronger, had proven his power at a higher level, right, against a higher level of competition. Both guys had fought Usyk, and Anthony Joshua had shown the ability to make adjustments against a guy like Usyk. He was able to make it the distance twice. He was able to control range here and there and land the occasional shot in the first fight. He was able to mark up Usyk's face, and Usyk didn't have it his own way the whole fight. In the second fight, he showed that he was able to bend at the waist, get inside and throw murderous body punches and cut off the ring at times and back Usyk up. And Usyk had to work really hard for those victories. Both of those victories, Anthony Joshua really forced a performance out of him. So you take that into consideration, the fact that Anthony Joshua had looked much better against the same opponent, and you look at the resume in general, Anthony Joshua had a much better resume, was more experienced as both an amateur and a professional, and he clearly had physical advantages, which should have made the fight, at very least, which should have taken him ahead 50%. The fact that he was just the bigger guy, the bigger puncher, the stronger guy, and had proven that at a higher level. He goes in there against Daniel Dubois, taking all these advantages into consideration, and he just squares up, stands in front of him, doesn't have a guard, doesn't move his head, and just walks into Daniel Dubois' jab. Like, literally, Anthony Joshua, all of a sudden, this guy who has been a unified heavyweight champion, who was able to defeat the likes of Vladimir Klitschko, Alexander Povetkin, Joseph Parker, guys of that nature, championship level guys at the time that he fought them. And a guy who, of course, gave Usyk two pretty awkward and difficult fights that both went the distance. He goes in there against Daniel Dubois and just stands there. Just stands in front of him, doesn't move his head once, doesn't use any feints, doesn't really utilise his own jab, just walks into Daniel Dubois' jab, pulls back straight, with his eyes closed essentially, throws the same uppercut 3 times in a row and sets himself up for the knockout. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It was the kind of situation you just could not make up unless you saw it. So it basically transcended logic. Anthony Joshua just forgot how to box. He forgot everything he'd learned throughout his career, all the development. Forgot he was the bigger man, forgot he was the stronger man, and just essentially threw his game plan out the window and froze up. And the guy who nobody thought was going to win going into the fight. I know in hindsight, everybody in the comment section is saying, oh, we knew this would happen. We know AJ had no chin, and we knew Dubois was the greatest thing ever, blah, blah. Everybody is a genius after the fight, but going in, nobody was saying this. And it just kind of, like I said, it was a situation that transcended logic, just like the Joyce Chisora fight. Now, all this ranting, what does any of this have to do with Bivol Beterbiev? Well, what I'm saying here is we have another situation potentially that's quite similar. So you have two guys here, both who have pretty similar attributes and both who have a lot in common, okay? Two Russians, both came through that Russian amateur boxing program. Both were very, very good amateurs. Both are a similar size, kind of, with similar attributes. They're both orthodox. Both good boxers, both very good fundamentals, good technique, good power, both light heavyweight champions. It's just that, once again, we have a situation where one guy is so much better in just about every area, and that is Beterbiev. Okay, both guys are very technically good, but Dmitry Bivol is a guy who is a lot more workmanlike. He has to work very, very hard to stay one step ahead of the guys he's fighting. You know, if you look at his resume, essentially, he's been the WBA champion for quite a number of years now, and he's essentially fought the second tier fringe contenders of the light heavyweight division, and he's been able to outbox, out-hustle, and outwork pretty much all of them, winning by decision. Now you compare that to Beterbiev. Beterbiev has basically cleared out the division. You know, he's become the lineal champion. He took on the likes of Vosdick. You know, he took on the likes of Callum Smith. He's taken on world-class champions and top contenders in the light heavyweight division. He's consolidated the belts. And unlike Bivol, who's basically outlasted these guys and gone the distance and won on points, Beterbiev has gone in there and blasted these guys out. Like, these fights have not been competitive. And that's because Beterbiev, not only is he physically a lot more talented than Bivol, you know, Beterbiev is much stronger. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I don't think anybody would disagree there. Beterbiev hits significantly harder than Bivol does with both hands. You know, pretty much everything he lands has a thudding effect. So he has better punching technique, and he's just more heavy-handed in general. Beterbiev appears to be a lot better at positioning his opponents, using his footwork to get them where they need to be in order to deliver the knockout punch. You know, Bivol's a guy who can move around you for 12 rounds and jump in and out with flashy combinations and do that enough, or with enough volume to win the rounds on points. But Bivol isn't putting a beating on these guys. You know, he's not setting these guys up with feints, getting them to try, you know, putting out some bait there to get them to throw something and then counter with something big, and then basically precisely and accurately break them down and force a stoppage. You know, he's not getting in there, taking the initiative, getting superior foot positioning, using feints, using his jab, fighting and boxing intelligently, and forcing the knockout, essentially. He's not able to do that the way Beterbiev is. Right? And Beterbiev's able to do that, as many people have pointed out, against a much higher level of competition. Again, guys like Callum Smith, guys like Alexander Vosdick, you know, guys like Adam Dines. These were all championship level contenders. You know, he in his, I think his 5th or 6th pro fight, he went and took on Tavoris Cloud, who was still a contender at that stage of his career. And the fight was not competitive, right? It was expected to be competitive going in, but it wasn't. Beterbiev took the initiative immediately, was able to draw a lead from Tavoris Cloud, and was able to counter, and was able to knock the guy out within 2 rounds. You know, he was able to fight top contenders like Kaladzic, you know, guys who you would expect going in to at least be durable and to at least give him rounds. And he was able to immediately get foot position on the guy, draw a lead from him, and land a punch that got him the knockout in the very first round of the fight. You know, he had a unification against Joe Smith Jr. when he was champion at the time, pretty much at the peak of his career. And again, it's a fight you would have expected to be competitive going in, based on the accolades of a guy like Joe Smith. But it wasn't competitive. You know, Beterbiev was able to get in there, was able to use his feints and his foot positioning to get Joe Smith into a position he needed to be in to end the fight quickly. The fight was not competitive. It was just as one-sided as the Tavoris Cloud fight was. He took him out in 2 rounds. Now, Joe Smith, to this day, I would argue, is still one of Dmitry Bivol's best victories. And Bivol got a lot of credit for outboxing Joe Smith, pretty much winning every round based on volume and lateral movement and just keeping the guy at long range and peppering him with combinations. But Bivol never came anywhere near close to stopping Joe Smith or to even have the referee contemplating stopping the fight. The fight was, Joe Smith was always in the fight. He was always there. He was always competitive. He was losing based on volume, but he was always able to land something. He was always able to walk through something. You know, Bivol was never able to get him into the position where he could execute a finisher. You know, he was never able to do that. So I think based on that, you know, based on how Beterbiev has been able to get the job done against a much higher level of competition consistently, and how he was able to completely and utterly thwart and blow away the same opponent that Bivol wasn't able to. And when you consider the fact that Bivol has faced guys who are significantly past their prime, the likes of Jean Pascal and Isaac Chilemba and guys like that, guys who have been stopped multiple times before, guys who were never really, even when they were championship level, they were never considered top tier, they were never considered elite. Bivol's been fighting these guys and hasn't really dominated them. Like, he's beaten them on points, he's outworked them, he's been the better technically of the two. But he's never really separated himself from these guys. He wasn't doing to the likes of Jean Pascal what Kovalev was doing, for example. To me, Bivol's just always been... Part of the reason I've been so critical of Bivol over the years is because he's just never really separated himself. He's never really proven himself as an elite level talent, in my opinion. He's a very good athlete, a very fundamentally sound boxer who does a lot very well. But he also makes a lot of mistakes, and he doesn't capitalize on a lot of the opportunities that he has, and it's because he doesn't have the IQ of somebody like Beterbiev. Beterbiev, like I said many times in videos, he can go in there in the first round against a world-class opponent, a guy with a lot of power, someone like Joe Smith, someone like Anthony Yard, someone like Callum Smith. Someone like Adam Dinez. He can fight these guys, big punchers and top contenders and world-class guys, some of them. And in the first round, he immediately is confident in his own ability enough to get these guys up on the ropes, to get in between their punches and land his own punches, kind of like Golovkin used to. Very rarely would guys last very long against a prime Golovkin. And it's because he's just levels above. Beterbiev so far, against everybody he's fought, has separated himself. He's proven himself to be leagues above them in terms of both physicality and skill. Now, I bear all that in mind going into this Bivol fight. When I look at both of these guys, their most recent performances, how they've looked, and just their attributes and their resume in general, I don't see a way, realistically, that Bivol wins this fight. I just don't see... How does he do it? What does Bivol bring to the table that, one, Beterbiev himself doesn't have, and two, that Beterbiev hasn't already faced and hasn't already dealt with? I just don't get it, guys. I don't see it. Again, it's another situation where logically you would assume the guy who is a little bit better in every area should win. Okay, Beterbiev is stronger. Beterbiev hits harder. I don't think anybody would deny with those two statistics. Beterbiev has the better competition as both an amateur and a professional. Right, he's faced significantly better opponents. Beterbiev has proven his IQ in the sense that he's been able to break down his opponents with footwork and feints and superior positioning, and being able to shorten his punches inside, being able to draw a lead from his opponent and find the target, being able to immediately display the kind of confidence that even though he's in the ring with a world-class opponent, he's going to be the boss, he's going to be the alpha. He's proven that many times over. He's proven his ability to fight on the road in his opponent's backyard and to still dominate them as if he were fighting at home. Beterbiev's proven all that. He's also proven, in my opinion, to have just as good foot speed as what Bivol has. I know Bivol moves around the ring a lot. He jumps in and out, this, that, and the other, but Beterbiev is able to get to the opponent very, very quickly. He's able to get in position. He's able to get to the target, from what I can tell, a lot quicker than Bivol is. And I think it's because he's a little bit more economical with his movement. So it would be logical to assume that Beterbiev has better footwork. I'd say Bivol might have quicker hands, but Beterbiev has fought guys in the past who have very quick hands. Guys like Anthony Yard, and still he's been able to break them down and stop them. So I struggle to see any advantage that Bivol has going into this fight, except maybe one advantage that I have spoken about at length in live streams, and that is age. He's the younger guy. Beterbiev does have knee problems. He does have, a myriad of injuries. But, we've said this before about Beterbiev, and he's been able to come through and he's been able to win. So assuming this is a real fight and assuming it goes the way that I logically assume it's going to go, I think that Beterbiev is going to stop Bivol. I think Bivol's going to have his moments here and there from the outside, just like Gvozdyk did. But Beterbiev's just too strong. He's too athletic. He's too genetically gifted. He's too powerful. And he's too good. He's too skilled for Bivol. I think Beterbiev is just a better fighter in every area. I'm sure after the fight, whatever happens, all the know-it-alls are going to tell me that they knew what would happen. And again, you know, they won big at the casino, whatever. Yeah, I'm going with Beterbiev by stoppage. I'm sure if Bivol somehow wins the fight, you know, I'm going to... Once again, it's going to be, you predicted that Beterbiev would win, and you don't know shit about the boxing. You know, I look forward to those comments either way. God bless.